Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that looks at Palestine in a totally different way, not through the lens of today's politics, but as the biography of a holy land. It's a story that's been unfolding for thousands of years, and one that, according to this account, explains everything about the here and now. So let's start in a place you might not expect. November 1917. A British commander rides into Jerusalem and supposedly says, "Oh, Saladin, we have returned." Now, the source we're looking at today says this wasn't just some military victory. No, this was seen as the latest move in an ancient religious chess match, basically framing the 20th century as a direct echo of the Crusades. So, to really get what's happening in modern headlines, this narrative tells us we have to rewind. And I don't mean just a few hundred years. We have to go all the way back to the very dawn of this land's sacred story. Okay, so the first big idea we need to grab onto is that the history of this land is seen as one long, continuous struggle that's all rooted in faith. It's really a story about a sacred duty and what happens when you uphold it and when you fail. And at the heart of it all is this one central question: who is actually divinely tasked with protecting and holding up the original, pure monotheistic faith in this most holy of all places? Now, this is where the timeline gets really fascinating, because this account traces the sacred origins of the land way back to a time before any civilization we know of. The story, according to this source, doesn't even begin with humans. It begins with angels. This whole angelic origin story kicks off with the building of two incredibly important holy sites. First up, the Kaaba in Mecca, which is considered the very first house of worship on earth. And then, second, the Al-Aqsa compound in Jerusalem. So, how much time passed between these two massive heavenly constructions? Well, the source points to a saying from the Prophet Muhammad, which says there were exactly 40 years between the building of the Kaaba and Al-Aqsa. So after this angelic foundation is laid, the account says the first humans to inhabit the land were the Arab Canaanites. They settled the area and they gave it its first name, the land of Canaan. Now, the key point here, from this narrative's perspective, is that this establishes an indigenous Arab presence right from the very beginning of the land's human story. The story then moves to a really crucial turning point: the arrival of the children of Israel, or Bani Israel, who were given a divine covenant, a special agreement with God. At a time when much of the world had, let's say, lost its way and fallen into worshiping multiple gods, this account states that God chose the children of Israel for a new job: to be the custodians of the Holy Land. Their mission? To uphold pure, unadulterated monotheism, the original faith. But, and this is a huge but, their history is presented as a repeating cycle. It's pretty straightforward. When they stuck to their side of the deal, they received God's favor and got the land. But when they fell into disobedience, they faced God's wrath and they lost that custodianship. The source gets really specific about the things that broke that covenant, things like killing prophets, changing their scriptures, and widespread corruption. This disobedience is what triggered the punishment part of the cycle, leading to disasters like the Babylonian exile, where they were conquered and the holy site was completely destroyed. So according to this narrative, all these repeated failures by Bani Israel weren't for nothing. They were actually setting the stage for a divine transfer, a passing of the torch for this sacred responsibility. And this source pinpoints this one specific prayer as the turning point. It's a prayer said to have been made by the prophets Abraham and his son Ishmael, right there at the Kaaba. They were asking for a future messenger to come from their own descendants in that very place. And this is where the narrative makes a really fundamental argument. That prayer is seen as a signal that the prophetic lineage, which had been passing through Abraham's son Isaac, was now going to find its ultimate fulfillment through his other son, Ishmael, who is the ancestor of the Arabs. And this, of course, brings us to the Prophet Muhammad. His arrival is presented as the direct answer to that ancient prayer from Abraham. He's seen as the final messenger, the one sent to restore the pure, original faith of Abraham for everyone, for all of humanity. So, according to this account, when the children of Israel rejected this final prophet, that was it. Their covenant was officially over. The divine responsibility for the holy sites, including Al-Aqsa, was formally handed over to the new community of believers who did follow him. And that's how this whole narrative comes full circle. The source uses this deep, ancient history to build a framework, a way of understanding not just the past, but all the conflicts we see in the modern world too.
The way it's presented here, the custodianship of Al-Aqsa is like a spiritual barometer. The idea is that the Muslim community's control over this site is a direct reflection of its own spiritual health. When their faith is strong, they are the rightful custodians. When it weakens, they lose control. That exact same divine cycle that was applied to Bani Israel.
And this timeline of who was in charge of Jerusalem is used to prove the point. You can really see the pattern the source highlights, right? You have control by Bani Israel, then they lose it to invaders like the Babylonians and Romans. Then it shifts to Muslim control, then it's lost to the Crusaders. Then it's reclaimed, and eventually you have the British arriving in 1917. Every single change is viewed as part of this bigger spiritual cycle. So, what you should really take away from this is that this framework completely reframes modern history. That British entry into Jerusalem in 1917, from this point of view, it's not some unique modern political event. No, it's just the latest turn in a divine cycle of faith, failure, and reclamation that's been on repeat for thousands of years. And that really leaves us with this one final thought. If you frame all of history as a divine cycle that's tied directly to a community's faith and obedience, it gives you a totally unique lens for looking at the present and the future. So, what does it mean to see current events not just as politics, but as theology playing out in real time?